9/11, what can I say other than it was a national tragedy?
9/11 was a national tragedy.
I think a lot of us have a friend or a relative that claims to have some kind of connection to 9/11. Like my Uncle Ruben, for example. He says he was right next to the towers when they came down, but I know for a fact he was in Queens selling fake insurance policies to Puerto Ricans. And my uncle wasn't alone. Believe it or not, 9/11 grifting is a lot more common than you'd think. In fact, in the wake of the attacks, a New York City psychiatrist got so many patients lying about being in the towers that day that she coined a term for it. In this video, I wanted to take a look at some of the worst offenders, some of the most egregious 9/11 grifters, so let's just jump in. The 9/11 attacks provided a massive opportunity for fraud. The official death toll was 2,977, but there were over 6,000 missing persons reports filed. Of those, 44 were for people who were still alive or never existed at all. Shortly after the attacks, the department that was in charge of claims got a call from a William Lung saying that his brother Stephen worked at Cantor Fitzgerald in the North Tower. Now, due to its unfortunate position, all of Cantor Fitzgerald's employees passed away once the plane hit. William requested a death certificate, but was told that he needed some kind of documentation proving that his brother was there before they could give it to him. So William faxed them an email exchange between Stephen and his boss. But there was something fishy about all this, so US Marshals started looking into the claim. They interviewed several Cantor employees who were lucky enough to not be in the building that day, and not a single person heard of a Stephen Lung. There was also no documentation proving his employment. It was pretty obvious that Steve not only had not died, but he was also alive. What? Who wrote this shit? So Stephen might have been alive, but he was nowhere to be found. It would take months for the marshals to finally track his ass down. On February 12, 2002, Stephen Lung was arrested at a post office in Manhattan, ironically not far from Ground Zero. In court, Steve admitted that he orchestrated the whole thing to avoid being charged with fraud. Apparently, during 9/11, this schmuck was out on bail for trying to obtain a US passport with the fake social security number. Oh, and his brother, William, the one who was so concerned about his well-being, didn't even exist. That was just Stephen pretending. The judge presiding over his case was understandably pissed that this guy used a national tragedy for his own personal gain. So they threw the book at him and gave him 4 years in prison. You know, I'm actually impressed. Bro turned a minor passport charge that would have gotten him a few months probation at worst into a multi-year prison sentence. It's kind of funny. You can't deny that. Oh, and speaking of funny, that's a great segue into our next person. Steve Renazzisi is a comedian best known for his role as Kevin on FX's The League, and that's pretty much it. Oh yeah, he was also in Paul Blart Mall Cop, so that's pretty cool. Before becoming a comedian, Steve's life was much different. He was working as an analyst for Merrill Lynch in the World Trade Center. His office was on the 54th floor of the South Tower. And you know what? I'll just let him tell the story for you guys.
Our building got hit with a plane.
54th floor of the South Tower.
So you're in the second tower.
Yeah.
Is that insane, you guys?
Yeah.
This guy was in the second tower of 9/11.
Yeah.
This isn't like we're doing some joke, or this is like real.
Mm-hmm.
The first tower got hit, and we were like, jostled all over the place. And then the Port Authority came on the loudspeaker, and they were like, "Hey, explosion in Tower 1. Things are being taken care of. Everyone remain where you are. Stay calm."
I went downstairs to see what's going on. I walk outside, I see the fire and everything, and then I watch the second plane hit the second tower. Like
From your tower.
You hear it. You're like, what
holy
the?
shit.
Yeah.
After the national tragedy, Steve realized that life was too precious to waste on some career you hate. So he quit his job and moved across the country with his wife to try to make it as a comedian in LA. And guys, let me tell you, being a comedian is the toughest job in the world. Probably second only to being a Twitch streamer. And Steve had a really hard time trying to stand out. But after 2 years of grinding on the road, he finally hit his first big break.
Slowly. Bring it up.
That's really nice, yeah.
Bend your knees a little bit. Bring it up slowly.
It's really good.
Very nice. Now, did that hurt at all?
But his career wouldn't really take off until 2009, when he was cast as Kevin in The League. This role was like a shot of steroids for his career. He started selling out shows, got his own comedy special, and even scored his own ad campaign with Buffalo Wild Wings. Since he was famous now, Steve naturally got invited on a bunch of podcasts hosted by other comedians, which would turn out to be the biggest mistake of his life. Now, guys, I don't know if you're aware of this or not, but the comedy world is very small. There's only about 200 elite-level comedians in the world.
There's so few of us. And worldwide, there's maybe 500 of us on the planet. You gotta be real generous and say 500 because it's really probably about 250. Right. Like legit comics.
Prior to 2009, Steve never publicly shared his 9/11 experience, but it was widely known throughout comedian circles. In fact, he even had a nickname, 9/11 Guy. Honestly, that's a pretty cool nickname if you're a white guy. If you're like a Pakistani gas station clerk, probably not so much. So inevitably, this story would come up almost every time he did one of these podcasts. He even talked about it in one of his friend's comedy specials. But the problem was, every time Steve told the story, he brought more and more heat on himself. And by 2015, the heat was strong enough to melt steel beams. On September 16, 2015, the New York Times released a bombshell article exposing Steve Renazzisi's lies. Not only was he not in the South Tower that day, he wasn't even in Manhattan. And it gets even dumber. Not only did he not work at Merrill Lynch didn't even have an office in the Twin Towers. So to summarize, he lied. Now, the obvious question is, why? Why did this mother sucker do it? Well, guys, it's really quite simple if you think about it. Steve was desperate to become a member of the 200. He had to figure out a way to stand out against the thousands of other civilians trying to claw their way into that elite group. So he made a little fib, just a little white lie about escaping the worst terrorist attack on American soil, And the lie just kind of snowballed out of control until he couldn't put the genie back in the bottle. Honestly, I feel like this is some shit Larry would do in Curb Your Enthusiasm. But not everyone found it as funny as I do. The backlash was brutal. It felt like every news outlet in the country was blasting this guy. He tried to do some damage control by making a 40-minute long appearance on Howard Stern apologizing about the whole thing.
It wasn't calculated at all. It was as simple as sitting at the Comedy Store and everyone like, hey, you're from New York? Yeah. Were you just there? You were around? Yeah, I was downtown. Yeah, I was there. You work there? Yeah, I did. You have like 15 seconds, I think.
Right.
To kind of go, wait, hold on, stop. I'm sorry, that's not true. If you pass that 15 seconds, it's sort of like, now I have to be the guy who's very strange and weird and just said I lied about 9/11.
Do you think of yourself as psychologically disturbed?
Some people forgave him, but it was too late. Not long after this appearance, he was fired from his Buffalo Wild Wings deal and pretty much everything else. His career since this whole situation has been not great. What Steve did was very, very stupid, but at the end of the day, comedians lie about stuff all the time. Bert Kreischer built an entire career based on a fake story. At least Steve didn't try to profit off of it like some other people we're going to talk about later. And speaking of profit, I don't know if you guys have noticed, but I've lost a little bit of weight recently. People keep asking me, Dan, how did you do it? It's very simple. Nicotine, Ozempic, and Rhino pills. I'm kidding. It was diet and exercise, of course, which unfortunately means I had to cut out my favorite sweet treat, cereal. Luckily, I partnered with Magic Spoon. Magic Spoon has, wait a minute, am I reading this right? 0 grams of sugar per serving? Plus it's high in protein and has no artificial colors? Which means I can finally enjoy a bowl of cereal guilt-free. Huh. Almost guilt-free. I still feel bad about that hooker I keep. Oh, and they also have these cereal bars, which are delicious, by the way. No joke, Magic Spoon sent me 4 boxes of these guys, and I've already gone through 3 of them before I could film this ad. They're really good as a healthy snack between meals. So guys, click the link in the description or scan this here QR code to try Magic Spoon and get $5 off. They're so confident you'll love their product that they even offer a money-back guarantee, which is rare for cereal. Again, link in description or scan the QR for $5 off. And thank you, Magic Spoon, for sponsoring this video. Anyways, let's get back to the video, shall we? As a child, whenever Fred Parisi was asked what he wanted to be when he grew up, his answer was always the same, an NYPD police officer. And in 1999, his dream would finally come true. But just 2 years later, that dream turned into a nightmare because of the 9/11. national tragedy. Parisi was at Ground Zero that day and many days after, sifting through blood, bone, and concrete, trying to save as many people as possible, which left him with lifelong medical issues, including a severe lung disease. But as was the case with many other first responders, Fred felt like the government and insurance companies weren't doing nearly enough to support him. So he took matters into his own hands and founded the 9/11 Rescue Workers Foundation, which would go on to become one of the biggest charities of its kind and raised hundreds of thousands for first responders and their families. He would continue to serve as the foundation's president for several years until March 29th, 2008. Fred was headlining one of his many charity fundraiser events when a group of police officers walked into the building. The other people in attendance started clapping, thinking that the cops were there to thank Fred for all his hard work. Instead, they put him in handcuffs and took him to jail. Now, you're probably thinking this had something to do with fraud related to his charity, but actually it was for the unrelated crime of stealing $300,000 from his friend and business partner. But I mean, come on. Who among us hasn't slimed a buddy or two for a quick buck? At the end of the day, the guy had done so much good and helped so many. Still though, it made a lot of people suspicious. And after his arrest, the New Jersey State Attorney's Office started looking into Parisi's foundation. Turned out that he was raising and giving lots of money to first responders. But he was giving even more money to himself. The state sued Parisi after they uncovered that the schmuck had spent $75,000 on dentist appointments, restaurants, and mortgages for him and his mother. Not gonna lie, that is pretty bad. But hey, he still helped people on 9/11, right? As an NYPD police officer. So he's not completely evil. Well, that is true. He did help people by directing traffic while the real heroes risked their lives at Ground Zero. Turns out the dude was still in the police academy in Brooklyn when the towers went down. He wasn't anywhere near Ground Zero. It gets worse. He was kicked out of the police academy 2 months after 9/11 after his boss found out he was previously arrested for impersonating a police officer. Now, Parisi claimed that these accusations were part of a conspiracy to ruin his good name, which might have been believable if he didn't have a long history of doing stupid shit. Since 1991, Parisi has bounced around several police precincts, never lasting more than a year or so. In between jobs, he would still drive around a police car and pretend to be a cop.
In the late 90s, he was convicted of impersonating a Jersey City police officer while repossessing a car. A year prior, he was dismissed from the Passaic, New Jersey Police Department for allegedly falsifying documents. And although Parisi allegedly told GPS he was a retired Iowa State trooper, he was fired within his first year on the job. Parisi was previously convicted in New Jersey for impersonating a U.S. Secret Service agent. He obtained a genuine set of Secret Service credentials to make a fake set for himself. He was caught when he tried to use the credentials to get out of a traffic ticket.
In fact, just this year, this mother sucker was found guilty of impersonating an officer and hitting a homeless man with his car. He's currently serving 16 years in prison for these shenanigans. Oh, and it wasn't just cops that he impersonated.
You also learned that Parisi is accused of impersonating a priest?
Yeah. When news got out that Parisi was an absolute scumbag, it sent shockwaves throughout the first responder community. A lot of them had become friends with Parisi over the years and felt betrayed, including one Charles Giles, who was personally screwed out of thousands of dollars by Fred. When he heard the news, Charles remarked, "He deserves to rot in jail," which, as you'll see in a few minutes, is a very funny statement. So let's talk about Charles Giles for a second. Charles was working as an EMT on September 11th. Unlike most of these people, he was actually there. And there's proof. While our boy Charles was out there saving lives, one of the towers collapsed and he was buried under a pile of rubble. Luckily for him, he was saved by a brave police officer named Mark Myers, who Charles referred to as his guardian angel.
This gentleman, this hero, this guardian angel that I knew as, at that point, 1236, grabbed me and tried to get me to the exit, get us to the exit. He just came over to me, he grabbed me, and he pulled me into an area that turned out to be a void, and he saved a lot of lives that day. I find out at a Catholic retreat that 1236 comes back to a Port Authority cop by the name of Mark Meyer.
For the next 3 months, Charles continued to go to Ground Zero and assist with the cleanup, which unfortunately left him with a long list of medical issues. And if that wasn't bad enough, all these health issues left him with crippling medical debt. The guy could barely afford to pay his mortgage and was in danger of getting foreclosed on. Luckily, the community was there for him. His friends, family, and several charity groups donated thousands to get Charles back on his feet. Now, guys, here comes the bad part, okay? The sad reality is that most of that money was going to cannolis and meatball subs. Remember Mark Myers, the guy who saved Giles' life? Well, that guy was nowhere near Ground Zero that day, okay? He says he never met Charles Giles in his life.
Never saw the person, never met the person. I was never inside the building.
You tried to pull him out, and the building collapsed on top of you.
Not true.
None of it's true.
None of it's true.
I interviewed Mark Meyer.
Okay.
He says he never met you.
Okay.
He says he doesn't know why you're saying that he rescued you. He was never even in the building.
Okay. I highly doubt it.
But wait, hold on. What about the video evidence I showed earlier? Well, some people analyzed it and it turns out it wasn't near the rubble at all. Like, yeah, he was in Manhattan that day being a paramedic, but everything else was a complete fabrication. Okay, so far we've seen people that lied about 9/11 for money, for fame, and for personal gain. But the last person we're going to talk about just did it for the love of the game. Dave Jimenez had the perfect life. At just 24, he was a senior manager at Deloitte, one of the largest consulting firms in the world. He was also engaged to the love of his life, Tania. Together, the two of them not only had the perfect relationship, but they also lived the type of extravagant lifestyle you and I could only dream of. But on September 11th, that dream would come crumbling down I can't really think of a good analogy here. Dave and Tania both worked in the Twin Towers. On the morning of the 11th, they kissed each other goodbye and headed to their offices. Dave's was on the 99th floor of the North Tower, while Tania worked on the 96th floor of the South Tower. The North Tower was struck at 8:46 a.m. The plane hit the 91st floor, which meant that Dave and everyone else above the impact zone were now trapped. Meanwhile, Tania was finishing up a meeting when she heard a loud boom and felt the building shake violently. At first, she was startled, then confused, and then horrified when she saw a giant cloud of smoke coming from the other building. Tania counted the floors trying to see if it was near her husband's office. She tried calling him, but the phone lines were out. Security got on the intercom and told everyone to stay calm and stay put until they figured out what was happening. To hell with them, Tania thought. She had to make sure her husband was okay. So defying their orders, Tania took her assistant Christine and they both made their way down to the 78th floor where they could take an elevator down to the lobby. The only problem was they weren't the only ones with this idea. The 78th was absolutely jam-packed with people trying to leave, and the limited amount of elevators meant that everyone had to wait and go down in shifts. The fear and uncertainty in the room was palpable. By now, people heard that a plane hit the first tower, but no one had any idea how bad it really was and how much worse it was going to get. As Tania waited for her elevator, she was startled by a woman screaming, "Another plane is coming! Another plane is coming!" Tania thought the woman was being hysterical, but when she looked out the window, there it was. A Boeing 767 was heading straight towards her. At 9:03 a.m., the second plane hit the South Tower between the 77th and 85th floors. As the plane hit the building, Tania was sent flying through the air and hit her head all the way down, knocking her unconscious. When she woke up a few seconds later, she was surrounded by fire and dead corpses. To her horror, Tania looked over and saw Christine's headless body lying next to her. Despite all of that, Dave was still at the top of her mind. She was desperate to escape and see him again, but the elevator wasn't an option anymore. And to make matters worse, the room was slowly filling with smoke. Tania realized she was going to die. But just as her life was flashing before her eyes, she felt like someone was hitting her in the back. She turned around and some guy in a red bandana was swatting her with his shirt. Tania didn't even realize it, but she was on fire, and the man was trying to put it out. The man pulled her up to her feet, gathered the rest of the survivors on the floor, and brought them to the emergency staircase on the other side of the building. At one point, Tania's legs gave out, and the man literally carried her down the stairs, which was not an easy task. Eventually, with the man's help, Tania made it out of the building just in time. Not long after, the South Tower collapsed. Tania would spend the next few weeks in the hospital recovering from her injuries. The whole ordeal left her with a huge burn mark on her arm, but physical pain was nothing compared to the emotional bombshell she was about to experience. While she was in the hospital, Tania got word that nobody above the 90th floor of the North Tower had made it. Despite that, though, she held out a delusional hope that maybe somehow he survived. Maybe he left the building before everything went down. She held on to that glimmer of hope for months, until March 2002, when his body was finally identified. Ironically, this was the same month that they were supposed to get married. In her grief, Tania joined an internet forum for 9/11 survivors. Now, it should be mentioned that at the time, survivors weren't really taken seriously. They were considered lucky to have escaped with their lives. Public sympathy was mostly reserved for victims and first responders. Members of this forum really relied on each other for moral support. And Tania was no exception. She poured her heart out, telling everyone about how she suffered from horrible PTSD, nightmares, and panic attacks. But worst of all was losing the love of her life. Now guys, this is probably going to come as an absolute shock, but Tania grossly exaggerated her experiences, okay? I know you weren't expecting this M. Night Shyamalanian level twist, but stick around because it gets so much more wild. This is just the tip of the iceberg. Now, Tania's story had a lot of holes in it, which we will get into, but obviously nobody thought anyone would be psychotic enough to spread misinformation in a 9/11 forum. So, the other members took Tania's tale at face value. Speaking of face, you guys notice her face is way too small for her head? Not that it matters, I just can't stop noticing. Anyways, Tania became like a celebrity amongst the survivors. While all of them had their own traumatic stories to tell, Tania's was just so much more intense. But hey, she wasn't there just to vent. She helped the other members a lot, gave them a shoulder to cry on, and gave them advice on how to cope with the trauma, which everyone really appreciated. Eventually, Tania and a few others decided that the survivors deserved a voice outside of this small forum. So they got together and formed the World Trade Center Survivors Network. Since Tania had a ton of managerial experience at her previous job, she took on a large role. With her help, the survivors were given permission to take a tour of the World Trade Center courtyard once it was cleaned up. This was a big deal because originally the site had only been open to first responders and family members of victims. Like I said, the survivors weren't really taken seriously, but now they were finally starting to have a voice, and it was all thanks to this beautiful broad. From there, Tania got involved in all sorts of events and fundraisers. Now, she was usually the center of attention at these events, which she loved. Well, most of the time. What Tania didn't love was the attention she was getting from the media. She was adamant that she didn't want her story to make it into the mainstream for reasons that will come up later. Whenever journalists would try to get too close, the other members of the survivors group would literally shield Tania. They would like form a line in front of her so that they couldn't get too close. Despite her best efforts though, Tania was inevitably coming into the spotlight. Eventually, she caved and did a short interview with Time Magazine's Amanda Riley, who quoted Tania in an article. "People cannot understand. We saw things. We had to make life or death decisions. The higher the floor, the more lonely you were. I can't get rid of my fear that it's going to happen again." This interview was just a taste of what was to come. In 2006, the 9/11 Tribute Museum opened. They planned to offer guided tours every year on the anniversary of the attacks. And guess who was chosen to lead the very first tour? Our girl Tania. Now, this was not going to be your average run-of-the-mill 9/11 tour. It was going to be attended by New York royalty, including Michael Bloomberg, New York Governor George Pataki, and of course, former Mayor Rudy Giuliani. Hey, I wonder what he's been up to.
Financial trouble is only mounting for former mayor of New York City, Rudy Giuliani. Giuliani is now on the hook for possibly thousands of dollars after losing a defamation lawsuit to Georgia election workers.
Oh, wow. Now, when Tania was first selected to headline this tour, she was excited, but in the weeks leading up to it, she was shitting her pants. A lot of eyeballs would be on her, and with them, a lot of scrutiny. When the day came, though, she absolutely knocked it out of the park. The three politicians that were with her showered her with praise and admiration. The media, who she was so terrified of, gave her a glowing review. "To behold her smile is to know the terrorists did not even come close to winning. To see that smile is also to be challenged, to be as decent and positive as this true survivor." Everything went better than Tania could have ever hoped. But this would end up being a huge mistake. But for now, Tania was enjoying the attention, and a lot of people in the crowd were inspired by her courage and positivity, including filmmaker Angelo Guglielmo, who wanted to make a documentary about Tania's story. She was hesitant at first, but eventually agreed. Again, another terrible mistake. Angelo shot 2 long-form interviews with Tania. Much of the time was spent talking about Dave. But let's put a pin in this documentary business for now. By this point, Tania had become like a rock star in the Survivor community. Not only was she the co-chair of the Survivors Network, but she was largely responsible for putting them in the limelight. And she was doing all this while working a full-time job, by the way. Obviously, that's a lot of pressure, and it was starting to get to her. Tania was quickly becoming mentally and emotionally unstable, often taking out her frustrations on the other survivors. Her friend Linda recalled that Tania would snap at her and insult her and even downplay her 9/11 experience. And Linda wasn't the only victim of Tania's outbursts. During a 9/11 anniversary parade, Tania had a full-on mental breakdown where she started yelling at and insulting members of the group. Not an uncommon occurrence. Whenever this happened, the other survivors would coddle Tania like a baby. It's like no one else was allowed to grieve, and she was the only one who could have any attention. The 9/11 Survivors Network was starting to resemble a cult, with Tania as the head. Huh? Oh wait, I forgot to mention her last name is Head. So that's actually a really good joke. The other members of the network saw themselves as below Tania, their leader who could do no wrong, and Tania slowly began asserting more and more control over the group. She spent several hours a day moderating the internet forum, telling people what they could or couldn't say. She basically became a Reddit mod, which is fitting because, I mean, Tania's behavior led to a lot of tension with some of the other members of the forum, particularly a guy by the name of Jim Jankum. Oh wait, sorry, I meant Jim Janka. Now, Jim joined the group because he had a tremendous amount of survivor's guilt to the point where he considered taking his own life. The forum was basically the only thing keeping him stable. But that didn't matter because Tania didn't like him. One day, after making a post she disagreed with, she completely banned Jim from the entire forum. And here's the most batshit insane thing of all. She then accused Janka of being a fraud, saying that he hadn't even been near the towers that day. She accused multiple people of fabricating their stories, and every time she did, whoever she accused would be ostracized from the group. The power was clearly going to Tania's head, but she decided to take things a step further and stage a full-on coup of the group. Gary Bogax was the creator of the original Survivors Forum, and he was also the founder and co-chair of the WTC Survivors Network, along with Tania. After Jerry voiced some concerns about Tania's behavior, she went nuts and gave him a list of reasons why he wasn't fit to lead the group with her. She also convinced him that other members of the group shared this opinion but were too scared to say anything, and that it was best if he stepped down, which eventually he did. Afterwards, Tania convinced the board to eliminate the co-chair position entirely, making her the president. It was kind of like in Star Wars Episode 3 where the Senate voted for Palpatine to become emperor, except worse.
So this is how liberty dies. With thunderous applause.
Tania's new position practically gave her unlimited power, and her first move was to kick Jerry Bogax out of the group. At this point, the Survivors group went from cult-like to more cult-like. Most of the other survivors worshipped Head and had unquestioning loyalty towards her, but not everyone was a devout member of the cult of Tania. Some people were starting to ask questions. Enter Brandon Chellis, one of the original members of the forum, along with Jerry. Brandon couldn't help but notice inconsistencies. For example, sometimes Tania would refer to Dave as her fiance and other times as her husband. Now, Tania talked about Dave a lot, but one detail she never really mentioned was his last name. There was only about 2 or 3 people that she ever revealed his last name to, including Brandon Chellis. So one day, Brandon Googled Dave, and get ready for this, he didn't exist. Well, that's not true. He did exist, just not the version that Tania had invented. Dave was a real person who passed away in the North Tower, and from what Brandon saw, he was a terrific human being. But in all the memorials and obituaries about him, there was never any mention of a fiance. So Brandon knew something was up, but he didn't want to be kicked out of the group like Tania's other enemies, so he kept his mouth shut. Luckily, he wouldn't need to say anything, because Tania's time was about to be up. Outside of the Survivors Network, Tania was a big deal in New York City, and not just because she looked like a Macy's parade float. That tour she did with Bloomberg and Giuliani was absolutely massive, and every newspaper in the city wanted a piece of her. Tania was hounded day and night by journalists. One guy in particular, David Dunlop, would constantly ask Tania questions about her experience on 9/11, which sent her into a mental breakdown. She was hysterically complaining to her friends that this journalist was harassing her. In reality, though, the guy was asking very basic questions like, what floor was she on? What was the full name of her husband? Things like that. When Tania complained to her friends, they were confused as to what the big deal was. I mean, at the end of the day, this woman sat down for a whole ass documentary, but she can't answer a few basic questions. That's when Tania revealed to her friends that the reason she avoided the media was because her legal status in this country was a bit shaky. She was afraid that if someone looked through her paperwork, she might get deported. Makes sense. Her friend Janice, another survivor, suggested that she talk to a lawyer, which Tania agreed to. Now, this is when things started to get weird. After Tania spent a very lengthy amount of time speaking to the lawyer, Janice was invited into the office, and the lawyer started saying some very, very weird things. You know, Tania, it's okay that you didn't really work at the World Trade Center, but had only been visiting when the terrorist attacks happened. Right? And you know no one will hold it against you if you only knew Dave for a couple of months and weren't married to him, right? And no one is gonna hold it against you if you embellished a few things here and there. You know that, Tania, right? Everyone tells a white lie every now and then. As you can imagine, Janice was completely dumbstruck. This was a person who she thought was her friend, and she'd been lying to her and everyone else for years. That day, Janice called David Dunlop and told him everything the lawyer had said. She also called up all the other survivors in the group, and just like that, the spell had been broken. It wouldn't be long before Tania was removed from power and expelled from the entire movement, but this was just the beginning. A few days later, the New York Times broke the story. Now the entire world knew that Tania was sus. People still say sus? I don't know. The Times noted that Merrill Lynch, where Tania supposedly worked, had no record of her ever working for the company. Similarly, Dave's family said they had never heard of Tania and that his emails had shown no evidence of her. His roommate in Manhattan also never met her. The true extent of her lies wasn't revealed until much later. You guys remember Angelo, the guy making the documentary on Tania? After hearing the news, he felt like he was stabbed in the heart. So he called Tania trying to make sense of everything, but of course she ignored him. It was clear he wasn't going to get any answers from her, so he took matters into his own hands and flew to her native Barcelona to get to the bottom of things. He would spend the next few weeks interviewing Tania's friends, family, and anyone else who was willing to talk. What he found out was a doozy. Tania wasn't just exaggerating her story. No, she had completely made up every single detail, including her own name. That's right, this biatch's name wasn't Tania Head at all. It was Alicia Esteve. Turns out, Alicia had a bit of a habit of making up stories since she was young, often about all the boyfriends she was dating, and she was also obsessed with the US. She was kind of like a weeb for America and had always dreamed of living in New York City. So after getting her degree, she decided to move to the Big Apple after 9/11. That's right, she wasn't even in the country when it happened. In hindsight, her story is so ridiculous that it's a surprise anyone believed it. Once again, Merrill Lynch did not have a fucking office in the Twin Towers. Plus, there was only 17 minutes between the two planes crashing. You expect me to believe this big body walked down 21 flights of stairs in 17 minutes? I think not. And then she got carried down the rest of the way? Get fucking real. The fact that it took journalists years to catch on blows my absolute mind. Then again, I guess you don't really want to be the guy accusing a 9/11 victim of faking it. Anyways, the documentary Angelo was making turned into an expose halfway through. I highly recommend you guys watch it or read the book he wrote about it. After the truth came out, Tania disappeared off the face of the earth. She never apologized and never even acknowledged her deceit. What a bitch.